As the Great Depression tightens its grips on a community, investigators think that they have already hit rock bottom, losing their careers, not being able to scrounge up enough food to eat. Well, people close to them start dying and going missing. Bleak Prospect is a scenario that's part of Chaosium's Nameless Horrors 2nd edition book, and this is a book all about putting some strange mythos entities that those who might be familiar with the mythos won't have heard of. Hence, Nameless Horrors. This is a one-shot sandbox scenario that takes about 4 to 5 hours to play. This takes place in Crawley, Massachusetts in 1932, which is notably during the Great Depression. The investigators are living in a shanty town, which during the 1930s was also called Hooverville. And this community is full of people who have lost their jobs, and they're all working together to try and just take care of one another. But unfortunately, a disease has ravaged this community, and it's a quite strange disease that involves some flaking skin and weird symptoms that no one really knows what it is. Unfortunately, no one on the outside of this town seems to be willing to help them. And now it's time for spoilers. A quote from the book related to this scenario is, "This is probably not a scenario for groups that like happy endings." And I read that and I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be perfect. The scenario draws heavily from the Lovecraft short story From Beyond, so it might be fun to read this while you're prepping. Here's the truth about what's happening in Hooverville. A secret organization called the Midas Circle is siphoning residents' life energy, leaving them as husks. Back in 1924, Hawks, an MU physics professor, found some papers on some experimentations that he was able to go ahead and finish as independent research at his home named Prospect. This research involved going to different dimensions where there were odd creatures who were oftentimes very violent towards hawks. There was a creature in particular that he labeled Species 17 that he brought back to our dimension. And what happens is this creature will go into the abdomen of a human, siphon their life force. Mechanically, this means their power and their luck. And then if you transfer this creature into another human, it will deposit the excess power and luck into this new vessel. So this Midas Circle has begun using these creatures to siphon from Hooverville and give themselves a lot of power and luck. And as a result, they've become very wealthy and successful, which is an odd thing to be doing during the Great Depression. One of the cool things is the pre-generated characters that came with the scenario have a luck of 20 and a credit rating of 1 to really accurately reflect how they're feeling in this moment as they're living in Hooverville. Now, I do recommend that you use the pre-gen characters because they have relationships that are directly related to both the community that they live and some outside connections as well from previous careers. So this made the scenario really feel personal to the players, and I had a couple players note that they felt really motivated to investigate this scenario, unlike sometimes in Call of Cthulhu where you kind of have to just go along with it even though no one in the right mind would do that. Well, one of my players was playing the mother of a child that get kidnapped. And a mother, at least in this situation, she's gonna do anything she can to try and find her daughter. So that's extra motivation that really kept the plot moving. And it was fun to experience the emotions of all these different community members as they went through the scenario. I want to hit on the list of NPCs really quickly. So the first aspect of this is there are quite a lot of NPCs in the scenario, but it's likely that your investigators won't meet them all. So don't feel too overwhelmed by how many there are, because depending on the path that they go, since this is sandbox, they'll probably only meet a select chunk of them. It's also a nice reminder to tell your players to look at the significant people and background of their characters, because those are going to be very important throughout the scenario. This scenario pops off with a lot of different things going on. So we have Agatha's husband that's actually dying from this mysterious disease, and it's not pretty to watch. So that has some sanity loss associated with it, which is a great time to mention that this scenario is big on sanity loss. So expect to have at least a couple bouts of madness as you're going through, if not end up with a player that goes indefinitely insane or permanently insane. In addition to this odd death, we have 2 children missing from the camp and a distraught Nancy who had witnessed something quite strange, as singing Puppet last night. It's all very weird, and It really helps to get the scenario going and people engage with these different avenues for investigation. They might find themselves at the Blue Star Diner, which is just a mile down the road, and Ida, who owns this establishment, is ever so kind and gives them used coffee grounds and some leftover food if they have any at that given moment in time when they were to visit. However, it's a nice reminder that Ida doesn't really want people from the shantytown coming in the front door. It's just another way to give an understanding of their circumstances and really just how down on their luck that they are. However, Ida can be really helpful to give clues to investigators. She would likely have connections in town as well, so it's a good place to really move the scenario along if need be. My players ended up going there first, so at that point in time I didn't feel the need to drop too many clues or hints, but I did give them a little bit to get going on their way. And if they go later in the scenario, it just might be a good way to navigate them in the right direction if you feel like your players might be swinging off in weird directions and not able to get on their way to Prospect. I'm going to lump together the police station and Bentham Hospital as they're both on Sedgwick's payroll, who is the leader of the Midas Circle. So they are instructed to not help anyone from Hooverville. And this is tough on the people that actually work there, because when your investigators go to them for help, the sergeant that they talk to or the doctor that they talk to at the hospital, both of these people want to help. They're inherently good people, but they're just not allowed to. And the sergeant in particular would fear for his safety and warns the investigators that they shouldn't get into too much trouble and keep asking questions. But the important thing to remember here is social skills can be super helpful, so persuading, charming, fast talk, intimidating, whatever choice they make to try and get information out of the sergeant or the doctor, it will be easy to do that once they make a successful roll. And as a little bit of a tangent, one of the places my players went to that was not included in the scenario is the Crawley Grand Hotel. This is the place that Molly is actually living at, who's part of the Midas Circle, and they started to kind of pretty heavily go down that path of investigation. So just be prepared that they might end up going to the hotel, and that's perfectly okay if they do. I had to just improv some of the clues that would be located in his room, and it was also fun to watch my players who were dressed in tattered and dirty clothing to try and get into this presumably fancy hotel. Even though the scenario has several different ways that they can get information, the investigators will all end up at Prospect House, which is where the machine that goes to a different dimension is located, but it's also where this living house is. Now remember that original guy, Hawks? He accidentally got stuck in the dimension for several years, but he escaped, and by that time he wasn't really human anymore and had to just attach to something close, which happened to be the house itself. The house is now becoming part of Hawks, and he's taking it over, starting with the master bedroom, which is basically his lungs and brains and all the important stuff, and then his kitchen representing his stomach and digestion, and the basement for, let's say, the excess waste that this organic thing might be taking care of. I love the feel and description of this house, so make sure to give players time if they want to explore each of these different rooms and really lean into that description. Now, my players were successful at saving Esther, and they started in the house. By the time they saw all the creepiness that was going on there, they didn't even care about the warehouse. They decided they definitely needed fire, which the scenario pretty clearly calls out that this is likely going to be a solution for lots of groups, so I wasn't surprised when it happened. There's a couple things you can do to make it a little bit more fun if they do go the fire route. The first is some explosions. So the warehouse, which houses this machine, there is likely a lot of electrical bits in that area, and explosion is very likely. So if they have decided to stay a little bit close or haven't gotten away in time, perhaps by a dex roll, then it's a chance that they could lose a good bit of damage there. The other aspect of this is there are creatures that are housed in the warehouse, and these dimensional creatures that are not from our world, who knows what they can survive. So I actually had a few jellyfish-like creatures just visually floating in the sky and traveling towards town to add a little bit of extra spook. My players, since they weren't in immediate harm from them, just kind of let them be. And then later on, they heard news reports of attacks that happened by strange jellyfish in the middle of the city. Surprisingly, all of my investigators survived. However, 2 of them did go indefinitely insane, and there were quite a few bouts of madness. So that really made for a fun scenario and a different way to experience the craziness as all of these things are starting to unfold, as they're very affected by these different events. This scenario was really solid. I was actually surprised how much I ended up enjoying playing it. There is a lot of story going on here, which is one of the struggles that I think the players won't end up getting the full story. It's very likely that they're not going to uncover everything that's happening in this scenario. But that's okay. My players didn't seem frustrated by the fact they didn't know what was going on. It was more of just wonder and curiosity and motivation to save people that they love. So I felt like it was okay that the story didn't fully wrap up for them, and don't be afraid as a keeper to finish the scenario with some loose ends. I love the relationships and connections in the scenario and the house and the different ways that the creepiness was encroaching on the people of this town. And overall, there's a lot of different levers to pull to get your players in the right direction. So although it is very sandbox and they can go whatever way they want, I felt like there was enough tools for me as a keeper to get them on the right path if I needed them to. And that's my review for Bleak Prospect. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!